Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending July 1st. So our last official week of June here. And it's actually lining up to be a pretty interesting week and not entirely challenging either, which is good. So let's jump in there and see what kind of fun we can muster up. We're going to start, of course, as we always do, with Aries. Aries continues to be focused on finances this week, with only Chiron to influence that, which is it good or bad? Chiron doesn't really do a whole lot of aspecting other planets, so it's basically just his influence. He's not bringing in influences from other places. And there's no other planets coming in to influence this week either. So probably not for a while. I think you guys got moon influence for a bit, and that's pretty much it. So in a way, that's kind of a good thing, especially when you're focused on finances. It's like such an important part of your life. There's so many people who hate money. They say they hate money. They hate dealing with finances. I'm not a huge fan of dealing with finances either, but it is necessary, and it is necessary to make changes um in your plans as you evolve with your plans, if that makes sense. So being open to change, maybe even a little bit of risk taking, is not necessarily a bad thing at this time. Chiron's influence in your finances is interesting. I know we've talked a little bit about this in the past few weeks. But the interesting thing to me with Chiron's influence in Aries is the fact that it is not so much about change as changing your entire perception into something that works best for you, something that resonates with you. The mythology behind Chiron is leaving what he was born into and what was expected of him to move into a lifestyle that was more cohesive to the way he felt, the person that he was. And even though he was born into a different world, he had the gonads, if you will, to completely change that, even if it didn't make sense to his family, even if he lost contact with his family. He felt that he had to go in the direction that he was pulled to go into. And I feel it's really important for you guys this week in terms of your financial planning is to make sure that you are planning in a way that is conducive to your needs and your lifestyle and how you want to live. So the old ways of your parents and grandparents may just not work for you, and that's okay. Just because they don't understand it doesn't mean that it isn't necessarily the best way for you to do things. So with that being said, that's what I have for you guys this week. And if you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would love it. And we are going to move on to Taurus, where we still continue to have Jupiter and Uranus influencing Taurus this week. Both planets also continuing to be in direct motion this week, so no retrogrades. Yet they're coming. Of course, they're always coming. Some very interesting things happening actually in terms of the interaction with these planets. And we've had a lot of big challenges with one or the other of these planets over the last several months. And so that is definitely something that we're getting a little bit of a break from. We do continue to have a square between Uranus, Venus, and Mars. And Venus and Mars are moving closer and closer and closer into conjunction with each other. So, of course, they're working together, but within this challenge specifically for Taurus. So Uranus is also focused right on the cusp of finances and long-term goals. So we're really delving into those financial goals here. And we have this sort of creative masculine feminine balance that is coming from Mars and Venus. But because there is a challenge between the two, there's a couple of different ways that we can interpret that. One, because Mars and Venus are focused on our support system, we have financial goals and we're not quite getting the support that we would like to see within those goals. So this plays out in couples who have two completely different mindsets towards the goals. They're not working together towards achieving a goal together. They sort of are individually dealing with things, if that makes sense. But the other way that this seems to play out a little bit is Uranus is all about looking outside of the box. So Uranus is like, I know how you've been doing it. Let's completely change the plan. And this may be why there seems to be such a struggle there, such an issue there with the support system aspect of it. Also, having to take into consideration that Mars and Venus being that logic and emotional balance, that is always the thing that gets in our way in terms of decision making. So making sure that you are focused on whether you are within that balance or outside of that balance is important. So it's almost like this challenge is saying, is a reminder to make sure that you are making this decision based on how it feels and how it makes sense or doesn't make sense, if that makes sense. We also have some interesting things going on this week as well. Of course, we do have an opposition with the moon as we move into actually, no, we're not moving into a full moon. Sorry about that. But we are going to have an opposition with the moon as the moon moves into opposition with Jupiter as well as Uranus, which is going to create a little bit of a challenge. Not as crazy as you might think it would be, but for a day there or so, it is going to feel kind of whacked out for sure, especially as this is more, it moves into opposition with these two planets, but it also squares with Venus and Mars. So it is a pretty big challenge just for a day or so about Thursday. So if anything's going to get chaotic, it's going to happen on that day. The rest of what we have going on, though, is the planets sort of lining up with other planets in very helpful ways, which is what we need, really, right? Especially after all the challenges that you guys have been having to deal with. It's nice to see these planets really coming together to help you out. We'll start with Jupiter's grand sextile with the Sun and Mercury, specifically at the beginning, or I'm sorry, at the end of the week. Mercury and the Sun are really in close conjunction with each other on Friday and Saturday. And of course, Pluto plays into this as well. Now, the Sun and Mercury are focused on career and legacy. Pluto is focused on those you love. I'm sorry. And of course, we have Uranus, which is focused on those long-term career goals. So this is interesting because the way that this is playing out really is that it's helping you to be able to put things in place that to ensure that your career is going to generate the money that you need in order for those long-term goals. And while we were talking about a lack of support and a possible disagreement over what direction our financial goals are going in, when you bring that person in to be helpful in that situation, this sort of opens things up to kind of bring a resolution to the argument. So you get to choose, basically. It comes down to you get to choose. Do you want to be right or do you want to collaborate? And it's that collaboration that's important. There is the saying, two heads are better than one. And there's good reason for that, because a lot of times the other person will bring in a perception or shed light on something that maybe you weren't thinking about that was really, really important. And no man really is an island. So a little bit crazy, a little bit chaotic, but a lot of really good too. It seems like things are opening up for you guys to really just take these plans and do some magic with them. I mean, that's really the word that's coming to mind for you guys this week is it's magic time. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And if you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and move on to Gemini, where all the action has pretty much left Gemini. We don't have any more planets in Gemini. Mercury's moved on. Of course, the sun has moved on. We do have Vespa moving into your sign this week, though, which is actually, we're kicking off the week with her movement into your sign. Vespa is more of a secondary planet, so it is classified as like a dwarf planet. It is actually physically there in the sky. And Vespa is most of the time known as the hearth, the eternal hearth flame that burns on the hearth. And so this, when you think of a hearth, most of the time you would think about home and security and comfort, and in basic human evolution, that space that you go to every single day that has your hearth is your home. It's your security spot, if that makes sense. And oddly enough, focus for Gemini is on long-term goals, specifically long-term career goals. So those two things don't really go together. That's home elements and work. Well, for most of us, we balance out those times with our, time at work and our time at home. But also, I like to look at this very interesting combination here. I like to look at this combination as basically shedding some light on why you're working so hard and putting putting the emphasis on building up that security, if that makes sense. So a lot of us, we live from paycheck to paycheck, right? And so in many cases, we get the paycheck, the bills go out, there's not a whole lot left over. And then in many cases outside of that, there is some left over, but we never see it because it went over here and it went over there. And most of us live our lives just sort of spending money as we're getting it. It's coming in and we're basically throwing it out, in, out, in, out. This is a time, and for most Geminis, we're not necessarily planners. I see a problem and I get it done kind of thing. So this is actually coming together and saying, okay, there are some things that you would like to address, and you need to make a plan, and you need to make a schedule, and you need to create these specific goals and things to ensure that these things are taking place. And this time of year is actually a really good time of year to get that done, because of course, weather-wise, we're not dealing with a lot of bad weather, depending on where you live, of course. Obviously, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it just turned winter, so it may not be great for you guys. But that also would include not being able to be outside and, having to deal with weather. And so being stuck inside and having to sort of be forced to focus on different things that need to be addressed within the home as well. Reorganization, things like that. I think a lot of us, most people, there are people whose houses are perfectly clean and everything has its place. And gosh, I would love to be one of those people, but I'm not one of those people. And so the rest of us, like me, need to be able to have time to focus on those specific things, because over time, the day to day, it just starts getting unorganized and crazy, and you just keep throwing stuff in this one pile. And this is a really good opportunity for you to take a look at that and see, is this space comfortable? And if it's not comfortable, what do I need to do to make it comfortable? Because the truth is, you're never relaxed around stuff. You're never relaxed around projects that haven't finished yet. Most of us, especially intellectuals, if the space is unorganized, we're unorganized in here. And that's something, of course, that you want to rectify as quickly as possible, because it does lower your productivity, if that makes sense. And that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would really appreciate that. And we are moving on to Cancer, where focus is on career, as the sun, of course, is influencing that focus on career. We have Mercury moving into Cancer as well, moving into conjunction with the sun by the end of the week, actually, and also lining up in a grand sextile with Jupiter and Saturn. Saturn's focus is on your day-to-day schedule. Jupiter's focus is on money and making more and more of it. And then, of course, we have the Sun and Venus focused on career. So a couple of things actually come out of this. One is that Saturn's influence is still retrograde. So when we're talking about your day-to-day schedule with a Saturn retrograde, we are talking about taking responsibility for your time and taking responsibility for your schedule. Now, most of us, and I am definitely one of these people, I have been known to do this. Most of us go around talking about how much time we don't have for things that will improve our lives. And the truth is that we have bags of time. We're just not really managing the time properly. So Saturn's influencing this. It's just showing you all the time that you do have, if you managed it appropriately. And if you did, you'd have all the time in the world to be able to make this money, which is what it's all about, right? With Jupiter being on the top of that little triangle right there, it's all pointing towards making that money, right? So this actually, with no other planetary anything in terms of, lining up in any other way, there's no challenges. This is just all straight helpful to you. I have to say that the one thing that I know is going to get in your way, Cancers, is this right here. So if you've got something that you want to jump on, something that you're thinking about jumping on, the more you think about it, the more you're going to talk yourself out of it, the more you're going to say it's probably not going to happen anyway, so I'm not going to do it. Trust me, get out of here and just do it. If you don't get it, try again. That's just how it goes, right? And that is the way life is always going to be, and there's no way that that's going to change. So it's time for you guys to be great. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do click the link and send me a copy. I would really appreciate that. And why? And we're ignoring that and moving on to Leo. I was thinking of Leo when my phone was ringing, actually, but it wasn't you. So we continue to have Mars and Venus in Leo. And Mars and Venus do continue to be squared with Uranus, which is focused on long-term goals right now. So that is a little bit of a challenge, but it's a little bit of a challenge. It does become a much bigger challenge about Thursday when the moon moves in to square those two planets as well and turns this into a T-square. And it gets a lot bigger there for just the one day, and then we move on again. But there is good news as well as challenges as well with these planets, as they are also interacting in very positive ways, specifically at the end of the week when these planets, it's almost like you have this major challenge Thursday, Friday, and then the moon moves in to a very favorable place where it's helping you. So at least it's helping this time, right? Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult when you add emotions to a challenge every single time. Focus is on your support system this week, with Mars and Venus moving closer and closer into conjunction with each other. We still have the Lilith is also is also influencing that as well in terms of your support system. Lilith is retrograde. And in terms of Lilith's change or influence over change in drastic ways, because the Lilith is retrograde, it sort of puts up a barrier. Like, there's nothing I can do to change this situation. And I can think of quite a few people actually who would be in a situation like that and say that very thing. There's nothing I can do to change the situation. Well, in terms of supportive family, if they've never been supportive and there's nothing, no matter what, they've never changed and they've never been supportive, chances are, yes, you're not going to be able to change that situation because you can't change those people. You can, however, change who you're going to for support. And a lot of times I get people telling me, well, then who's the person I'm supposed to go to support? Because there is literally nobody. You got to keep looking at that point. That's the answer to that question. You just have to keep looking. Eventually you will find that support that you need, if that makes sense. The interesting thing about Mars and Venus working together in this is one of the things that Mars and Venus represent, especially when they're working together, is that balance between the masculine and the feminine. And the fact that the two are coming together very strongly in Leo currently right now sort of shows that the support that you need is not just for decisions that you need to make. It's not just for creative ways of doing things. It's sort of a mixture of both. And what's interesting to me about that, especially for professionals, is that for a lot of women, we tend to be more creative, or we over intellectualize as if we're trying to be men. Either way, we're going to the extreme of that teeter-totter, and we don't want to go to the extreme of the teeter-totter, that balance that throws the scales out of balance. We want to stand in the middle of the teeter-totter, balancing out the two sides, using both equally to create and manifest what we need, if that makes sense. Also, at the very end of the week, when the moon moves into a trine with these two planets, the moon's influence is over the mind. So we're talking about emotional thoughts. And really, these planets working together is basically with the moon saying you can have emotional thoughts in a good way and not just in a bad way. So a lot of times when we say the word emotion, we think bad. We think sadness, we think anger, we think everything bad, but emotions are good. And there's so many wonderful emotions that we could be experiencing outside of the bad ones, if that makes sense. So remember, emotions are not necessarily a bad thing. And when you change what you're saying to yourself, you change the way you feel about the situation. And by doing that, you actually look at the situation in a completely different way. So it counteracts the challenge a little bit. At least it presents a lesson in the challenge for you to learn that will benefit you next time the challenge comes up, if that makes sense. So, pardon me, things are getting better. That's the whole point. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do click the link below in the description and send me a copy. I would really appreciate that. We're going to move on to Virgo. And moving on to Virgo, we're going to kick off the week with the moon in Virgo in a T-square with the sun, Mercury, and Neptune. Neptune's focus is on relationships. The sun and Mercury are focused on career, and the moon is focused on self. So this is actually a pretty interesting challenge here, really, because when you're looking at the opposition between the sun and Neptune, this is really the problem that we're having here, is that your ideas, people's ideas around you, specifically close to you, are clashing. And we're really specifically talking about ideas for growth in your career. So I would say that this plays out to me. I'm a Virgo child, and if he came to me with this idea that of it for a career that made tons of money, but it was like, hanging all day from the side of a cliff where he could fall and kill himself, obviously I would disagree with that, and I would decide that I don't like that idea, and I would probably fight that idea. And he would probably be upset with me because I'm not supporting this idea that is going to make him a millionaire overnight. Okay, that's actually not a valid, never really happened kind of example. But off the top of my head, John, don't do that. He probably would actually. Basically, it's like I have it all figured out. And then you go to somebody and they come up with all kinds of reasons why this could be a problem and all kinds of reasons why you don't want to go this route. And it really is disheartening. But then we move into the next day, and the moon is not even influencing anything anymore. So it's a problem that's there, but it goes away pretty quickly. It's not a problem that's going to stick around all week long, which is good. As we continue through the week, focus is still on self. And with no planets to influence that focus, this really is all about you standing up for yourself. It's about you basically learning whether or not you are a moldable person or you are a person that calls your own shots. Now, mutable signs, and Virgo is a mutable sign. Mutable signs are known for being easily talked into things. I've known quite a few Virgos in my time, and I can say that that is true to a certain point. With all the mutable signs, it is very easy to talk them into things, but you're an individual. And the question that you want to ask yourself is, am I an individual or do I follow the crowd? And it is pretty common for Virgos to follow the crowd, which is fine. But do you get to pick and choose? When are you going to be an individual and when are you going to follow the crowd? Because the truth is, when you follow the crowd, you're just another lemming like everybody else. But when you choose to be an individual, you're probably the one leading the crowd and then to really the place that you want to be in. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And if you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would really appreciate that. And I'm going to pause for just a minute. Okay, moving on to Libra. We have the sun moving into Libra on Monday. I'm sorry, the moon, not the sun. It's a little early for the sun. The moon, a moon on Monday is just never a pleasant experience, although it's not too terribly bad for you guys. Focus is on self, or at least the moon is bringing that focus of self when focus really is on the past. And a lot of times, especially for Libras, a moon focused on self, especially when it's squared with the sun, which is focused on career, kind of sort of basically creates one of those chaotic situations where something goes wrong and you guys just take it so personally. Not saying that you shouldn't take it personally, not saying that it's not a big deal, but people do make mistakes and it is okay. You will survive from them. Nobody is perfect. I suppose you should be, you could be, whatever, but really nobody is perfect. So there's no sense in putting that much pressure on yourselves if you don't have to. As we move into Tuesday, the moon's focus moves into the past and moves into a sextile with Mars and Venus, which are moving very, very, very close together into a conjunction. They're in a pretty close conjunction with each other actually right now. Their focus is on your support system. And even though the sun is squared with Pluto, which is focused on those you love, so it kind of feels like you're having a difficulty with the same people that you've always had all the time, that sort of balanced support system comes in to sort of give you a little bit of a helping hand with that, or maybe even to help you understand a different perception about that cycle, if that makes sense. Once we get past Tuesday, that feisty moon gets out of there and these little issues will be gone and things are a little bit less chaotic and a little bit more smooth sailing throughout the rest of the week. With focus continuing on the past, though, I do want to say this. It is really important that mistakes or challenges or difficulties that do take place, regardless of where they take place, that you don't turn this into one of those things where you recount every single mistake that you've ever made in your entire life. A lot of times, I feel like that's why Libras put so much pressure on themselves to be perfect, is because they're trying to avoid another mistake. And the truth is that you can do as good of a job as you possibly can to avoid as many mistakes as possible, but you are never going to be perfect. And the minute you agree to this, the minute you accept this as the law, as truth, the easier it will be for you in the long run. Think about the amount of pressure you hold every single day trying to be perfect. It's got to be exhausting. It's got to be heavy. It's got to make everything else that much more difficult in the long run. And when you really think about it, do you really want to make things difficult for yourself? That's how you got to think about it in order to ensure that you're living life to your best potential. And also take into consideration that the more you're afraid of making mistakes, the more likely you are to make a mistake. So the more relaxed you are, the better it is for you. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And if you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would really appreciate that. We're going to move on to Scorpio. As the moon moves into Scorpio on Wednesday, it moves into a grand trine with the sun, Mercury, and Saturn. Now, a grand trine means that there is a planet in every single element. So all the water elements, with the moon moving into Scorpio, that means that there's a planet in all the water element signs. So it is actually a pretty big aspect, and it is a very big and helpful aspect. The moon's focus is on the past. The sun and Mercury are focused on career. Saturn is still retrograde and focused on your day-to-day schedule. Now, this can be interpreted in a couple of different ways. One, you may be thinking of making some career changes. And again, that pesky little, I really don't have time to do that thought comes up. But this sort of opens up a link to the past to show you how you may have moved things around and reorganized things on your schedule in order to make time to take this leap. And you can come up with a million excuses like, well, I was younger then, it was easier, or I didn't have children then, and now I do, blah, blah, blah. The whole point of looking back was that you didn't let anything hold you back. You did what you needed to do in order to make the change that was best for you. And really, that's what this is all about this week. The moon does move into opposition with Jupiter, and indeed with Jupiter and Uranus, and by Thursday actually moves into a T-square with both of those planets, including Mars and Venus and Leo as well. Now, Mars and Venus are focused on your support system, and Uranus and Jupiter are focused on your long-term financial goals. So this does create a challenge because, first of all, we're thinking about times where we had specific goals in mind and didn't really have the support that we needed to make those goals realities, if that makes sense. This really could be interpreted as you were younger at the time and didn't know where to go to get the support. Now that you're older and wiser, you do have a little bit more knowledge of where to go to get the support. There's financial planners everywhere. And of course, if you need financial support, you want to go to a professional, right? Because they're the ones that are really going to be able to help you. Whereas a friend who might know a little bit of something, probably not your best course of action, really. I'm just saying. I mean, they probably have their heart in the right place, but you want knowledge, and you want specific knowledge that's going to get you where you want to go. So that old thing that was holding you back isn't necessarily holding you back anymore. And you want to make sure that your mind isn't playing tricks on you on that, or you're not using old excuses that don't apply anymore, if that makes sense. And that will help you get through that challenge. You have all the support that you need. You just need to make sure that you're looking in the right place for it. As the moon moves out of your sign, she moves into a grand sextile with Pluto and Neptune. Neptune's focus is on your relationships, and Pluto, also retrograde, is focused on those you love. With the moon's influence on your thought process, this is one of those beautiful moments where you really just get to sit back and appreciate the people that are in your life. I find that occasionally when I'm not doing a million different things, and when I'm just in one of those moments where I'm sitting there and my family is around me and everybody's just kind of sort of talking and laughing and happy, it's one of those moments where I really just look around me and I'm grateful for everything that I have, for the people that are in my life, for the circumstances in many cases that I'm in. And so many different things. And I feel that that's one of those moments that just sort of comes up for you guys, that shows you, gives you that moment to just slow down and appreciate everything that you worked so hard for up until this point. That's pretty much what I have for you guys this week. Focus really still is on the mind and how you think about things, outside of any planets coming in to influence that at all. Focus continues to be on the mind and how you think about things. And remember, your thoughts have power, and how you choose your brain communication to yourself determines whether you are successful or whether you stay in one place. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And if you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would love that. We're moving on to Sagittarius, where focus is on the home, although we have the moon coming into your sign right at the end of the week, Friday and Saturday specifically. And while the moon square with Saturn is a bit of a challenge, because Saturn's focus is on your day-to-day schedule, and Saturn's retrograde. So a typical Saturn retrograde is really showing you your responsibility to your schedule, not allowing you to use everybody else taking up your time as an excuse as to why you don't have any time. We're all guilty, okay? We are all guilty of that. Most of us do that from time to time. The moon's focus is on how you think. So this just sort of cements that idea in there that we convince ourselves, we make up lies, tell them to ourselves, convince ourselves that these lies are truth, and then basically we do whatever we want, right? And then when things don't get done, we're looking for somebody to kind of sort of point the finger at. This square is like, point the finger right here, okay? Because it is all on you. Look in the mirror, honey, because it really is all on you. Annoying when that happens. And as much as I get annoyed when it happens, I do appreciate it as well after I get annoyed, of course. We do have the moon coming into your sign in a grand sextile with Neptune and Pluto, though. Pluto is focused on those you love, and Neptune is focused on your relationships. Again, we're changing our perception on those around us. So the square is saying we're blaming everybody for the reason why we don't have time for anything. And actually, the moon's grand sextile with these two other planets is saying, instead of using them as an excuse why you don't have time, learn to appreciate them when they are there, because the truth is they're not going to be there forever. And that is the certainty among life, period, is that nobody stays around forever. Just a classic example of appreciate your children while they're little, because they won't be little forever. And that is a true story. You blink and literally they're grown all of a sudden. So that sort of kind of comes in and to stop using them as excuses and appreciate them, because there may come a time when you would love to be able to sit there and appreciate them, and they're not there to appreciate, if that makes sense. As we move into the weekend, the moon's trine with Venus and Mars becomes very helpful as well. We're still focused on how you think. And the moon is actually showing emotional thought processes specifically. So when we're talking about a trine with Mars and Venus, which is really focused on your support system, we're actually thinking really hard about how we look at that support system. Most of the time, when we're in an emotional space, a negative emotional space, our thoughts go to, there's nobody there for us, right? You could actually have like 50 people in your life, but your brain is like, nobody's there to support you. And so I sort of interpret this to be one of those instances where you may be in that kind of mindset, and these people just keep coming out of the woodwork. Either your phone keeps ringing, or people are just showing up, or somehow it's proving to you that that is not the case, that you do have a support system, and that you just got some stinking thinking going on in there that might need to be addressed. Once you're done with your moodiness, I am a firm believer that we have to honor how we feel. And if we're in a grumpy mood, then be in a grumpy mood. Don't live there. Obviously, living there is not good for anybody, right? But give yourself the time to just sit there and be grumpy for a while. I do that all the time. Yes, I'm choosing to be grumpy right now. I'm going to give myself an hour, and then I'm going to get over it. It really does help to to allow yourself that time, but to put a time limit on it. The more you fight it, the more you struggle with it, the more you try and get out of it, the more it sucks you in, if that makes sense. In this way, you're not fighting the emotion, you're honoring the emotion, and then you're letting it go so it can move on to something else. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And if you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would love that. We are moving on to Capricorn. Focus is on those you love this week. And we, of course, still have Pluto 29 degrees retrograde in Capricorn. We'll just be talking about Pluto being in Capricorn for a while, because his retrograde is 4 to 6 months, so we're not getting out of it anytime soon. We have a couple of very interesting things that are taking place in terms of how Pluto is lining up with other planets. We're going to start with this the really good one here first, as we are in a grand sextile most of the week with Uranus as well as Neptune. Uranus is focused on long-term financial goals, and Neptune is focused on relationships. With Pluto focused on those you love, we're really talking not just about our own specific financial goals, but financial goals around family, so around other people. So we're looking at planning travel for your children or your grandchildren or your family in some way. We're talking about finances that are specifically going towards the financial security of other people and not necessarily just yourself. And things line up very favorably for you to do that. But we also have the moon moving around this week as well. And it is sort of moving in some challenging places here and there, specifically as we get into Wednesday, when the moon is really close to a T-square with Pluto and Jupiter. Jupiter's focus is on finances. And again, we're talking about things lining up favorably to go towards finances, specifically towards family members. And then it's like something comes in about Wednesday, Thursday, and throws a wrench in that, right? But it's a temporary wrench. It's not something, I mean, I even see it as it's not an actual wrench. It's more of a threat of a wrench that doesn't actually even happen. So really the only reason to bring it up is just to remind you that there's no sense in losing your temper or getting all worked up over something that you don't know is going to happen yet. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. Capricorns do tend to be a bit pessimistic. They do tend to focus on the negative. And when a problem comes up, they go straight to, this is going to just end everything and screw everything up. And then the next day, it turns out that that was just really a waste of energy to get all worked up over something that really wasn't going to happen. So don't get too worked up over it. Use your energy for something more productive, which, I mean, you're Capricorn, so it's always got to be productive, right? The other thing that is sort of interesting to me here is that the moon, as we get to the very, very end of the week, the moon also moves into a grand sextile with Neptune and Pluto. So we've got two different grand sextiles going on Friday, right? The moon brings this interesting element of bringing how you think about things into things. And we were just talking about Capricorns being a little on the side of pessimistic, right? And that really is a big example of how your mind works against you. When you're constantly looking at something in the negative, it really does expend a lot more energy than if you're looking at it in a positive way. So it's that constant expectation that something is just going to get screwed up that is exhausting after a while. And I feel like at this time, when this happens towards the end of the week, you may actually experience a couple of instances that will sort of prove that to you a little bit and might even make you think about that and think about how helpful that is from here on out. It may even change your whole life. You never know. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do click the link and send me a copy. I would love that. And we are going to move on to Aquarius. Aquarius is still focused on your day-to-day schedule just for the rest of this week, actually. And then we're going to move on to a different focus. We do have Pluto 29 degrees Capricorn still on the cusp, so still very heavily influencing Aquarius as well. And we have some really interesting stuff going on there with Pluto as well, specifically the grand sextile that Pluto is in with Uranus, which is your ruling planet. So that's nice. As well as Neptune. Uranus is focused on long-term financial goals, and Neptune is focused on your relationships. With Pluto focused on those you love, this is really actually a fantastic opportunity for you to sit down with your loved ones to make sure that you're on the right track, both of you, with your financial goals. Now, here's why this is important for Aquarians, okay? Aquarians are very independent-minded. So it is, I, as an Aquarian, often have to be reminded after almost 30 years, I know it's crazy, that I'm married and that decisions have to be made by both of us. We're both coming up with a plan, not just me coming up with a plan. And so a lot of times what happens is I get this thing in my head that this is what we're going to do without discussing it with my husband. And then it obviously doesn't go as planned because, well, he doesn't know what my plan is. I never even told him. So this is actually, to me, these planets are coming together as a reminder that it is fine to have your independent plan, but if you are in relationships with other people, it's a good idea to clue them in every now and then because it makes things easier for you. Also, it could make a good plan a better plan. Just because we're Aquarians doesn't mean that we know everything, right? Even though we do go around professing that we do. Actually, I don't do that quite as much as I used to because that in itself is exhausting, if that makes sense. As we get to the end of the week, the moon comes in to form a grand sextile with Pluto as well as Neptune also. And it kind of adds another layer to this. This sort of the moon's focus on the mind really showcases how emotional thoughts play into your success, be it in your relationships or financially. And this is just as true for us as it is any other sign. Aquarians have, and I think this is what makes Aquarians loners quite so much, is because they convince themselves that nobody needs them. And usually that's probably because nobody listens to us because we're on a different plane than everybody else. Okay. So we convince ourselves that nobody needs us and try as we might to kind of sort of just do things on our own because it's just easier that way. Why should I take time to explain this, but I can just get it done myself? Again, this is a reminder that we're human beings and we're supposed to be human beings with other human beings. It's not about us as loners. So for me, that is interpreted by making sure I'm out and about in the world more and not secluding myself as much as possible, if that makes sense. So lots of really, really good stuff going on here. We have one little bit of a challenge with Pluto moving into a square with the moon about Wednesday. Little bit of a challenge there when it seems like old BS is coming up with certain people around you. And, basically any kind of pattern that reoccurs is definitely something that needs to be addressed. Obviously, there's a lesson in there that you need to learn and you've been avoiding it. I know Aquarians never avoid their lessons. Never, 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 right? Make sure you're not avoiding that lesson because the minute you learn it, the minute you don't have to learn it anymore. Think about it that way. And that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a copy. I would love it. And we are finally moving into Pisces, where focus is on relationships and in some cases on your day-to-day schedule this week, because of course, Saturn is really bringing that influence in as well. Two things that come out of that. Number one is with two planets bringing two influences in, I feel that part of this is making sure that you make time for the people that are closest to you, for the people that make you feel good. I think with Pisces, most Pisces really enjoy time spent with other people. In fact, they need it. I was just talking about the Aquarian being a hermit and secluded from everybody in the world. Pisces is completely different. Pisces needs people. And so having the time to spend with those people really is important. And we just sometimes get so busy and so wrapped up in what we're doing that we don't think about that. So that's something to think about this week for sure. We have Neptune going retrograde at the end of the week as well. So all the way up until Friday, Neptune is direct, and then by Saturday, Neptune is retrograde. Neptune is in a couple of different, really, actually both planets are in a couple of different really good and really helpful aspects. Specifically, let's look at Saturn right now with its grand sextile with the Sun and Jupiter. Jupiter is focused on finances. The Sun is focused on career. Saturn is retrograde and focused on your daily schedule. Most of us talk about how they don't have time for various different things, and the truth is that we have all kinds of time. We don't always manage our time very well, and so Saturn's retrograde is basically turning that responsibility onto yourself and saying, look, if you want time, you need to eliminate some time wasters in order to make sure and ensure that you do have the time. If that makes sense. Pardon me. I'm going to pause for a second. Okay. In terms of Neptune does start off the week in a T-square with the moon as well as the sun and Mercury. And it is in a square with the sun at the beginning of the week for the first few days of the week, I should say. By Wednesday, that challenge is pretty much gone, which is good because, pardon me, Mercury also influences that challenge. So it's good that it breaks up before we get to that. But that challenge actually is a very interesting challenge because the sun is focused on career. Neptune is focused on your relationships. And so this creates a challenge. I'm in a pause. I'm so sorry. This does create a little bit of a challenge when you have specific career goals and the people that are closest to you get in the way of that. Now, I just had a tickle in my throat, which was getting in the way of me being able to talk, which is very similar to what I'm talking about here. And this can play out in many different ways. In some cases, it's somebody who, calls you all the time at work. It's somebody who doesn't agree with the job that you have, so they do whatever they can to put obstacles in front of you. Bottom line here is that most of the time, this becomes an issue because there's one little tickle in my throat. This becomes an issue because rather than understand where the other person is coming from, you get defensive, they get defensive. Pretty soon it becomes an argument and it's a fight. And there isn't always a resolution in that fight. Sitting down with the person in order to talk with them and communicate with them and help them to understand the goals that you have and the reason you're going in this particular direction is so incredibly important. I've been in both of those scenarios within my own marriage, and one definitely works out way better than the other one. When we get into an argument, there is nothing but the argument. So nobody is going to understand the other person because you're stuck in this, I have to convince you that I'm right sort of a mentality. There is no right and wrong. And bottom line is that if you sit down and have a conversation about it, you definitely will get somewhere with that as opposed to the argument. So really important that you maintain that conversation rather than trying to force your point in there, if that makes sense. Bottom line is there's a lot of favorable energy for a lot of really awesome things for you guys this week, specifically in your daily schedules as well as within your relationships. And it is really imperative this week to embrace and enjoy those relationships. I think that is, of anything else that I could say this week, of the utmost importance, especially the relationships that are really challenging right now. They may be really challenging right now, but again, nothing lasts forever. So sometimes it's good to appreciate the challenge as well. So that's what I have for you guys this week. I'm so sorry that I choked through the whole entire thing. Hopefully it makes sense. And if you love your horoscopes, do click the link below and send me a coffee. I would really appreciate that. And that is what I have for the horoscopes this week. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. Love you guys. Have a fantastic week. I will see you guys next week. Have a good one, everybody.